So it is lesson 5. It's actually part 2. We don't have a part 1 recording, unfortunately, because I neglected to start it. So just a quick word. So I've marked assignment 1 if you've submitted it. If you haven't, please submit it for part marks by tomorrow. Our midterm is going to be in 2 weeks. We have no class next week. So our midterm's worth, I believe, 15%. Half of it will be multiple choice and half of it will be a practical section where you have to deploy your pages to GitHub and to AWS and submit those links. And the exam will run during our regular class time from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. You want to make sure you sign into the WebEx room so you can ask questions and hear any instructions. So far today, we've been working on delete. So we've added delete links to our items page. So we've added a third column inside our loop where we're using an anchor tag. We're linking to delete item.php, and each link is going to include on the end the unique item ID. We use Bootstrap to style these links as buttons. And then we also wrote a little simple JavaScript function in a new file we created in the JS folder called scripts.js. We're using JavaScript's built-in confirm method. It gives us a modal pop-up with an OK and a cancel button, and those return true or false. We've linked that JavaScript file in the header of our items.php. And then we've used an on-click handler to return, to call that method and evaluate whether it sent us back a true or a false. So what we now have are these red delete buttons. If we click one and click cancel, maybe I need to save my file. Whoops. Let me make sure this is working. Cancel. I stay here and I click OK. It takes me off to the delete page. So that's kind of what we managed to accomplish so far in class today. And by the way, I noticed when I was away, someone asked in the chat, how do you find the GitHub repository? It's inside of Weekly Learning and Tools and Resources. It's one of the items right at the top is the link to my GitHub page. So you can always find our work in there. So we've done the first part of it. We now need to build our delete item PHP page that's going to parse out the URL and grab the ID. We're going to connect to the database. We're going to set up and run our SQL delete command, close the connection, and then we want to bring the user back to this page. So the delete page is actually invisible. Users never actually even see it. Megan, you have to know the GitHub username. So you can just, like, you can search for somebody here, right? Like if you needed, sorry, you just go to the GitHub homepage and from here you could search for someone. So that searches for repositories, but you can search for users, right? So there's JW. So just go to the home page, search there, go to users. So let's build our delete item.php and let's get this working. So we're going to make a new PHP file called delete item. So this is going to be a hidden page. So we'll put on a set of PHP tags here. So we want to read the item ID from the URL parameter. We'll connect. Set up and run the SQL delete command. We'll disconnect, return to the updated So these are all the steps we're going to do. A lot of these we've done before. A few of them will be a little different. So our item ID is here in the URL. So how can we read this value? Any ideas how we can parse out this ID? Good guess, Mason, but we're not actually using post in this case, right? What method is used? Yeah, Hannah, that's right. When the links are in the URL, we use get. So using the get collection. So get will allow us to read any URL parameters. So we'll read the URL parameter called item ID. Yeah, Mason, Chris, you guys have it right as well. Our connection is going to be the same, right? db equals new. We use MySQL. And I'll put in my credential again. Okay, Mason, good question. Technically, yes, but right now it's all public anyway, right? Because anybody could come to this page. There's really no security. So there's nothing to stop anyone from coming here and just clicking delete beside any one of them anyway. So yes, we can look at encrypting these IDs maybe later. So instead of showing this, it shows, you know, like something like that, where we encrypt and decrypt the value. If we have time, I haven't typically had time in this class to do that before. If we have time later in the semester, remind me, and we'll try to tackle it, but we may not have time. But great question. I'm glad you raised it. So our typical database connection, our SQL command, we want to delete from items. This would work, but I would suggest we don't want to run the SQL command like this. What's the problem with it right now? It's functional, but right, it would delete everything. So what would we need so that it doesn't delete everything, Megan? Yep, Drew, that's right. Where our item ID is equal to, and this is where we're going to use a parameter. So Mason, we could inject this variable, but then that leaves us open, right? If we just inject the variable, we might have this. So if we inject the $ right in here, so it's better, we want to use the parameter for safety instead to prevent SQL injection, and also do some type checking. We should add that as well. Make sure that this item ID is numeric. So we'll add a check for that as well. So then we'll create a command using our connection and our SQL. So this is the same as we've done on all our pages that use the database. And then we'll fill our item ID parameter from our item ID variable. So we'll call bind param. We're going to fill the item ID parameter with our item ID variable. And we define it as an integer, so it won't accept any kind of SQL string. And then to run the delete, we just do cmd, we execute the query. We'll leave this redirect for a minute. We want to make sure this actually works first. And we should probably also add a check to make sure that this value is numeric. If we have no item ID, we don't want to do any of this stuff. So I'm just going to indent all this code. I'll put it up on paste bin in a minute in case you miss any of it. So we'll say if is numeric, and I'll just move that closing curly brace all the way down to the bottom. So all of this code only happens if we have a numeric value for item ID as part of our URL. So we can try this out. I'll put it up on paste bin. We can give it a shot. I'll put the link in the chat. Again, make sure you use your own database credentials here. So we're going to check that we have a numeric URL parameter called item ID. If we do, we're going to store it in a variable on line 12. We'll connect to the database like usual. We'll set up our delete command with an ID parameter. We don't want to delete, as Megan said, all the records in the table. We only want to delete the record the user clicked on. We'll prepare our command, populate our ID parameter with our variable, and define it as an integer for type safety. We'll execute the command in the database, so when line 21 runs, that record should be removed from MySQL. And then we'll disconnect. We'll add this redirect once we're confident that this code is working. If we redirect and this throws an error, we'll never see the error. It's just going to take us back to the other page and we won't know what went wrong. So I'm going to try this out. So I'm going to go and try and delete item 1002. So I delete, I say okay. Didn't get an error, got a blank screen, so that's good. That's what we should get. If I click back and refresh, that item is now gone. If I delete, click OK, refresh. So now I can start to clean up all the stuff on the list that I don't want. So we really only need we want one more line of code on the delete page, which is the code that will automatically bring the user back here. I've been clicking back and refresh. I don't want to have to do that. After the delete runs, I should automatically just get taken back here. So I'll barely even notice that I go to another page. My browser will just kind of flicker for a second. PHP has a really weird way of redirecting from one URL to another. Other languages have logical functions like redirect. PHP has a bizarre way of doing this. It wants us to modify the HTTP headers by providing a new URL, which is kind of a goofy, really old way of doing this. So I'm going to use the header function, and in here I can set a location. So this is the goofy PHP syntax for automatically taking the user to another page. So we'll use this often, like after a login, for example. We take the user off somewhere else. That's a good point, Mason. Yeah, I guess so, right? If this isn't numeric, yeah, we could just take them back. I like that suggestion. Thanks, Mason. So yeah, I'm going to put it outside. So it happens regardless. Good idea. If no numeric item ID URL parameter, just reload anyway. So yeah, we should go back there regardless. We can try it both ways. So here's so if I try this out now, we should just basically see a quick flicker in the browser. So now if I want to delete my noddles, page just reloads and jumps back to the top. I'm going to delete this item. I still have some duplicates in here. So now we can use delete to clean up our list. So we've done everything we set out to do. We added a link, we added a confirmation, we built our delete page where we can identify which record the user wants to remove. We've connected to the database. We've set up and run our SQL delete command, disconnected, and then taken the user back here. So we've now got 3 of the 4 CRUD features working. We can create, we can read, and we can delete. The last thing we want to be able to do here is we need to be able to update this list. So there's a couple ways here, a couple of options we have. Actually, sorry, just before I go on, does anybody have any questions about the delete page, about what's happening here? Anything that you're not quite clear on, doesn't really make sense, you'd like to look at a bit more? Okay, thanks, Roshan. Delete's probably the simplest. Thanks, Sammy. Probably the simplest of the 4 CRUD methods. The only complex part with delete really is the confirmation that we only need when we're deleting. We don't want this when we're adding, updating, or reading. That would just be annoying to people. We only need to give them a confirmation when they delete. So now we want to let somebody update an item. So from this page, I could see a couple of options visually. What could we add to this page so that a user could update one of these? How could we let them select an item here? Yep, that would be an option to deal. So we could add we could have like an edit button over in the actions. That would be one option. How else could we do it? Any other simple way we could let a user pick one of these items? Besides an edit button over here? Yeah, we could also turn the name into a link. We probably don't need both. I'm going to do both just so we can go through it and you can see how to do both. The edit's basically going to be like doing the delete. we'll add another button here, and we just can leave out the click event. We can also make the names into links. So you could just click the name if you want. So let's start with the name first. So if we want to make this a link, inside our first column here, I'm going to add a link. Our link is going to go to item details. We're going to use the same page that we used for adding. So we just want to load this form. I'll have to fix this. We want to load this form, but populate the name, quantity, and category. So just like on our delete link, we'll pass in item ID equals. So our link's going to get a little messy. So we're going to pass in our item ID onto these links. Oops, and I need a single quote here. Okay. So I've added in an ahref. We're linking to itemdetails.php, item ID equals. Yes, I will, Mason, sure. We're appending on the ID and then closing the anchor tag and then ending the anchor tag at the end of our column. So here's the new. So the quotes are kind of tricky, right? Because this is a literal string, and then we want double quotes for our attribute values. So our href is all wrapped in double quotes. Oh, I just need to put my password back in item details. That's why it's not working. That's fine. So if I refresh now, each of these is a link. And it goes to item details. And just like our delete links, it passes in the ID. So that's one way we can do it. We could also put an edit link beside our delete link. I'll do that as well. We probably don't need both, but I'll do both just. So I'll add an ahref here to item details. We're going to add the same ID parameter on. Let's see, we'll use a button. We'll maybe try button secondary. Not sure what color that'll give me. And this will say edit. And it'll just put in a space. So inside my existing column, before the delete button, I'm going to add an edit button. And again, I'll put this whole thing here. Probably not necessary to make the name a link as well as have an edit button. We'll just see how it looks. It looks something like this. So my buttons and my item names, they go to the same page. Again, probably both aren't necessary. One or the other is sufficient. So we're kind of done with this page now. So now we need to modify our form Let's go and put my password back in my item details. So my form is loading, but it's blank. So what are we going to need to do here so that when we edit something, rather than getting a blank form, our form is already populated with this item? How can we do that? Right? This would be annoying. Now I don't know what item I'm editing, and I can't see the original values. So what will we need to do so that this form is populated when we're editing? Okay, yep, we're going to need to show the value. Right, so Chris is right. We're going to, just like we did on delete, we're going to grab the ID from the URL using get, and we're going to select this item from the database using this ID parameter. As Nadeal said, right, we're going to run a query to select just this one record. And that's going to give us the name, the quantity, and the category of this one record. We can then use those to populate our form. Once we have that working, we'll also add a little bit of Bootstrap formatting to clean this up too. So in item details, we need some logic up here. We can put it anywhere really, but I'll maybe put it right at the top of the page. So we're going to put on a set of PHP tags. Check if there's an item ID So if we have an item ID, we want to go to the database, fetch it, populate the form. If item ID is blank, we're adding a new item and we're just going to show a blank page. So first we'll say if not empty, so if we have a URL parameter called item ID, we'll also check that it's numeric. In this case, we'll set item ID Now we need to connect. So then we want to fetch selected item. Now we've already got our connection here to fill our dropdown. Now our code at the top, it may run or it may not. So I'll just copy the connection. Normally we don't want to connect more than once, but in this case, we're not sure at the top. Maybe we're connecting, maybe we're not. So I'll just connect again for simplicity here. We'll connect. We'll set up our SQL with our parameter. Same parameter we used in our delete. We'll create a command just like we always do, exact same code. Should be starting to get familiar, right? Bind the SQL statement with the database connection. And then we need to, again, populate our item ID parameter. Oops. So we'll call bind. We're going to bind the item ID parameter with our item ID variable, which is an integer. Don't type these words in gray in your code. Those are just code prompts from PHP Storm. So the word param, var, and type, those don't actually belong in the code. We'll execute our query. So you can start to see this stuff's kind of getting repetitive, right? We did this on the delete page. The connection's the same on every page. We're using a parameter like we did on same parameter on the delete page. We call prepare and bind the param. We call execute. So we're really just doing the same kind of steps over and over again here. Lastly, we're going to do one new thing, is we can just call the fetch method. So use fetch for a single record. So we don't need to use fetch all here because we're only selecting one record, only the one that matches this item ID. So fetch all is going to give us a list which we have to loop through. We don't need a loop structure here. We could use fetch all and loop around one time, but it's actually slower. Faster to use fetch. That will just populate a single item object for us. I'll put this code up on Pastebin so far. It won't do anything yet. We won't see any changes. Here's the link in the chat. So this should be starting to look somewhat familiar and repetitive. It is. So let's start by trying to print out just the item name. So on my line 30, I can use the value attribute in HTML, and then I can inject a set of PHP tags right inside of here. And I can echo out. Let's see, how do I want to do this? We'll echo out our item name. So if we are editing an item, it should print the name of the item into this input box. So what I've highlighted in blue, that's new. I'm going to try just this out and we'll see what happens. So I'll go back here. And if I refresh, I now get the name of my item showing up here. If I go and pick a different item, uses the ID to query, print it out. So I want to do the same thing with the quantity. The category is going to be a little trickier though, because we can't just print the value. We actually have to select the right option in the dropdown, which is a little more complicated. So we're going to use the value attribute for the quantity as well. So our value equals, again, we'll open and close a set of PHP tags inside of the value. And now we'll echo item quantity. So this should now print out the quantity into the second text box. So 1 block of tofu, 2 shiitakes, great question, Mason. Here, when we called the fetch method to fetch the record, we stored it in a variable called item. So fetch is populating a single record. So we need to call fetch and populate this. So that happens right after we call execute. No problem. So it's mostly working. We're almost done. But the problem is our dropdown, right? It says bakery. I know I did not, when I added tofu or tomatoes, I know I didn't put them in the bakery. So we're going to need to add some logic here to select the right option. So here's how we're going to do it. So we're going to check if current category matches the item category when editing. So we'll do this. We'll say if our item category ID is equal to the current category ID in the list, otherwise we'll print out the option tag we already have. So just print out a regular option tag if the current category is not the same as this item's category. If it is, our option tag is going to be a little different. So I'll copy that in here. We're going to add one thing here, which is we just add the word selected. We don't have to add selected equals true. So if the current category matches the category our item is in, we want to automatically select that. I'm going to try this out and see. So if I refresh now, okay, my first few food items didn't have a category. When I pick lobster, it defaults to seafood. When I pick bread, it shows bakery. Bagels shows bakery. Coffee, because I don't think I have a category attached. So by adding the word selected to one of these categories, it will properly default the drop-down list to the right category if there is a category attached to my item. So this is mostly working now. It sort of looks like it's working. There's a couple little things we should do with it. Easy to break. If I take out my ID parameter, now I get this. Notice I've got this error. So what does the error say? So this works when we're editing, but when we're adding a new item when we have no ID, we've now broken the page. It says item is undefined. So we're using this item variable when we're editing, but we're referencing it even when we're adding now, and it doesn't exist. So what we need to do is we need to declare this item variable first, right at the top. So we're going to initialize item variable. We'll initialize it to null and see if that may not fix all of our errors, but we'll try it. Okay, didn't quite work. Adil, you could do it that way as well. Yes, nothing wrong with that. Didn't totally fix our problem, though. I'm going to try all of the fields. Let's see. Name. I'm going to see what happens if I initialize all of these to null. Yes, you could definitely do it in an else statement. That would work. But you might need to repeat it twice because there's the possibility it's empty or the possibility it's not empty but not a number. I'm going to see if this gets rid of my errors. So I'm going to initialize all of these as nulls. I'm a bit confused that I keep getting this. Maybe it's cached for some reason. Let me see. Interesting, because I'm still getting, it looks like it works, but I'm getting these errors in my HTML, which I don't want. Just going to try it in a different browser for a second and see if I get the same. You're getting them too? Okay. I have a workaround. You know what? Yeah. Let's see. Interesting. Okay, no error in Chrome. I'm just going to go here to a private window in Firefox. Okay, looks like it was maybe just it's just cached. Looks okay. So by initializing these to null, so Megan, you said it worked for you without these. Maybe we don't need them. I would think I shouldn't need them. So now it should work whether I'm adding or editing. Yeah, I think it's actually okay. Ah, thing drives me nuts. Okay. So we can now populate our form. So it's almost 4. So we're going to take a break here. I will upload what we've done so far to GitHub. When we come back, we want to do 3 things, and we should have time to do them all. Number 1, we're going to use Bootstrap to format this a bit so it looks more like the rest of our site. We then need to modify our save page, because watch what happens. If I click save here, it tells me it's saved. But what does it do? Our save page just runs another insert. So rather than updating, it's now done another insert. So we need to add some logic to the save page. So if we have an existing ID, we can do an update. If we have no ID, we can do an insert. And then we want to just add a couple quick things on here. We want to add a link to add a new item. We also want to show the category here. We're storing the category, but it doesn't actually show up on this page. So we're going to modify our query to make it a little more complex so we can show both the items as well as the category. And then later we can sort and filter by category. Not today. Okay, I will pop my passwords out of there. And I will push to Git, and we'll be back in 10.